On February 14th this year, South Korea and Cuba established consular and diplomatic relations after 65 years. So what efforts made this formal friendship possible? What has been the public response to this diplomatic feat? And what are the prospects of future collaboration amid this new status in bilateral ties? Welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. It's been roughly about a month since Seoul and Havana shared their new status as formal friends, and for more prospects of their future partnership, I have Kwon Soa here in the studio. So it's good to have you back.
Happy to be here, Sunny.
I also have Jadis Camila, a Cuban singer-songwriter, with us. Jadis, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Right. So on February 14th, as I mentioned in the clip, South Korea announced its establishment of diplomatic relations with Cuba. Let's begin off with some details about the efforts that made this formal friendship possible.
It was quite the surprise when we heard that South Korea has forged diplomatic ties with Cuba, especially because leading up to that agreement, we haven't really heard much about those efforts on that front in the media. Now, as officials explained, the government has been engaged in fierce diplomatic efforts in the past 2 years, but said the Yoon Suk-yeol administration has been keeping those efforts low-key. Serious discussions were likely on the table at a number of encounters, including a closed-door meeting between the foreign ministers of the two countries at the UN General Assembly in September last year. Negotiations reportedly accelerated during the Lunar New Year holidays, and a final establishment of the new ties was then carried out last month through an exchange of diplomatic notes between Seoul and Havana's representatives to the UN in New York. Now, endeavors towards such relationship actually date back to more than 2 decades ago, but for a long time, the socialist country and close ally to North Korea has been responding passively. So let's take a look at some key events in South Korea-Cuba ties. Cuba had officially recognized South Korea as an official nation in 1949. Since Fidel Castro took power, 10 years later, things went downhill. And then, since year 2000, South Korea pursued diplomatic ties with Cuba, starting with the Kim Dae-jung administration. Later, as you can see, the Lee Myung-bak administration. And in 2016, which would be under the Park Geun-hye administration, then top diplomat Yoon Byung-se became the first foreign minister to make an official visit to Cuba, followed by Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa in 2018 under the Moon Jae-in administration. And current Foreign Minister Park Jin met with Cuba's Deputy Foreign Minister at a meeting of the Association of Caribbean States in Guatemala, and then met his counterpart at the UN General Assembly, as I mentioned before. So liberal and conservative administrations alike all put their efforts in this relationship with Cuba in the past 24 years.
Right, good to know. So what has been said about the perhaps broader implications of this new diplomatic friendship between South Korea and Cuba?
Well, once the news was out, which was at a very late time in Korea here, by the way, most of domestic media focused not only on the significance related to the ties between South Korea and Cuba, but also put a lot of attention on how North Korea will respond to this surprise establishment. Some say the reason for the quiet announcement late at night has also got to do with Pyongyang, just like the talks leading up to the big agreement were held in top secrecy. According to a presidential official, the forging of diplomatic ties with Cuba represents the culmination of Seoul's diplomatic engagements with socialist countries, including former Eastern Bloc countries friendly to North Korea. The official added the establishment, quote-unquote, clearly indicates who holds the upper hand, implying South Korea holds a diplomatic upper hand over North Korea, which has been enjoying diplomatic relations with Cuba since 1960. Calling each other brother nations. Pundits say Cuba has chosen practical benefits over loyalty to resolve its economic downturn. Now, apart from the fact of having one of Pyongyang's traditional friends as a diplomatic partner, for South Korea, this new relationship is also seen as a turning point in expanding its diplomatic horizons in Latin America. And what's also significant is that South Korea now now has diplomatic ties with all UN member states apart from Syria.
Right. And now, Jadis, you are a Cuban residing here in South Korea. What are your thoughts about this latest diplomatic development? And what has been the response to this from your friends and family back in Cuba?
Well, first of all, I think that is a long-awaited event for both countries when it comes to bilateral relations, and also because of the people and how Cuban and Koreans feel towards each other. Given the fact that we have such a long historical relationship going on that not many people know about, but we have historical, cultural, and also economical ties that have been going on for a while. So it was actually something that Cuban people were waiting for. And the day that the news got out, I do remember getting a lot of texts and calls from my family and friends here and in Cuba, and also here. Everybody like, oh, finally this is happening. And I was like, yes, so happy. And it was like a very, very happy couple of days because everybody was like getting to know about the news, and everybody was very happy about it.
Right, but your decision to come live here in South Korea took place well before, of course, this particular diplomatic feat. Could you share with us a bit about your personal journey from Cuba to here, South Korea?
Well, my journey turned out to this way because I started studying Korean in Cuba back in 2015. I started studying Korean, and I fell in love with the culture. And after I finished my bachelor degree in Cuba, I decided that it would be awesome for me if I could study abroad in Korea, especially because I fell in love with the culture and learned about music here. And I got the chance, especially through the connections, the cultural connections that have been made between the countries. And I heard that Cubans could finally apply for the International Students Scholarship in Korean National University of Arts. And that's how I applied, and I actually got here. And I got here in 2020. I did my master's degrees in musicology, and I recently graduated.
Congratulations. What was your first encounter with Korean culture in Cuba, though? Was it from music or movies?
Dramas.
Korean dramas.
I think that the first approach of everybody in Latin America and also in Cuba has been through dramas. And after getting to see the dramas, everybody goes like, this music is so good, and everybody starts to search for the soundtrack, and it becomes a whole thing. And I do remember when I was in my last year of high school that they started also airing dramas in TV, Korean dramas.
Right, I see. Now, so while diplomatic ties between South Korea and Cuba were announced this past Valentine's Day, the two countries have been actively engaged on the economic as well as cultural fronts over the past years, right?
Right. Official diplomatic ties are not necessarily needed to have some kind of interaction between two countries. As Jadis mentioned, the interaction was there. For instance, KOTRA, the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, operates a trade center in Havana since 2005. And as of 2022, trade volume with Cuba amounted to around $14 million in exports and $7 million in imports. According to a 2021 study by the International Policy Research Center, a Cuban think tank, the two sides have established important commercial ties in the automotive, electronic, and mobile phone industries in recent years. People-to-people exchange has also been increasing, with around 14,000 Koreans traveling to Cuba each year, before the COVID-19 pandemic, that is. Also, some 1,100 residents of Korean descent live in Cuba today. They not only live in the capital Havana, but also cities like Cardenas and Matanzas. It began with the first 300 Korean immigrants having arrived on the island nation in 1921, when Korea was under the colonial occupation of Japan. In terms of cultural exchange, Cuba has a Korean language school in Havana, and some 10,000 people are members of a K-culture fan club. So all of these figures, we can imagine, will grow from here on thanks to now the official diplomatic ties between the two countries.
Right, and talking about K-culture, Jadis, what more can you tell us about the popularity of K-music, movies and dramas in Cuba?
It's actually great. It's bigger than everybody expected it to be. And I think it started in 2014, especially, it had a boom because people that were at the time watching Korean dramas and listening to the music started to create this sort of fun reunion in Facebook. And it became a group. And this group of like, maybe at first, I don't know, a couple hundred people started to say, we should get along and like meet for real. And these people that met for real became our core, friendship, club of friendship between Cuba and Korea, and the name is Arcor. And the funny thing about this kind of club, fan club, if you want to call it like that, is that in other countries in Latin America, you have it as well. But in Cuba, since we didn't have diplomatic ties, it became also some sort of cultural embassy per se, because it became a point of encounter between the Koreans and Cubans when it came to friendship and events and doing things together. And this is actually one of the places that that it's so important when it comes to the love that Cuban people have for Korean culture. It's amazing. They do events, dances, concerts, everything.
Do you have friends calling you right now, perhaps, asking you about travel plans to the country and where you should visit if you're coming to visit, let's say, capital Seoul?
Right now, I don't have friends talking about that. They are kind of curious between, the Korean language kind of classes that might appear, or opportunities to study, or maybe cultural exchange. Because when it comes to tourism, I don't think that right now anything is out yet. And that, I think, it could take a while, but people are very looking forward to the exchange, the cultural exchange.
Right, and speaking about that, Soa, what can you tell us about some of the more tangible administrative changes that will take place now that diplomatic relations have been established?
Right, South Korea and Cuba from here on are expected to actively discuss follow-up measures through naturally more government-to-government communication. So one of the first talks will be the establishment of missions in both respective countries, meaning having an embassy of the Republic of Korea in Cuba and vice versa. While, as I mentioned before, some 14,000 Koreans have been traveling to Cuba annually, until now, systematic consular assistance to them or to Korean residents was not easy. So according to Korea's presidential office, with expectations of a rise in tourists, including group tourism, following the establishment of these diplomatic ties, immediate consular assistance for any incidents or accidents will be available 24 hours upon the opening of diplomatic offices. Also, visa issuance processes are likely to become easier. However, while administrative changes might make it easier to travel to Cuba, officials called for caution for Koreans that plan to visit Cuba and then the U.S., as travelers could become subject to a ban on visa-free entry to the U.S. So that could be a task to be addressed. On the back of the new diplomatic ties, South Korea and Cuba are also expected to expand economic cooperation and work on establishing a system to support businesses in entering each other's country. Official Development Assistant, or ODA, to Cuba is also anticipated, which will also mean more opportunities for Korean companies to enter sectors such as food and telecommunication.
Right, and from a more perhaps civilian perspective, Jadis, as a Cuban living here in Korea, what are some of the changes that you hope to see amid this new diplomatic friendship?
I think the most expected thing would be to have an embassy, a Cuban embassy here in Korea, because as a foreign national living here, it's quite difficult, and sometimes it feels a little bit of protection when you don't have an embassy, because you don't have where to address yourself when anything happens. So that's something that Cuban people living here are always talking about, that is a sour spot. But now with this new appearance of the diplomatic ties, everybody's looking forward to the embassies. And maybe that doing papers and stuff like that could become a little bit smoother for everybody.
Right, of course. Jadis, in the absence of an embassy here in South Korea for you, how have you been perhaps securing the essential assistance that you would need as a foreign resident here in the country?
Yeah, right now, as we do it so far, is that we tend to communicate via email or maybe phone to other Cuban embassies, the nearest one here. That would be the one in Japan or the one in China, is as far as we can do It's just contact them.
Right, I see. But that's quite a hassle then.
Yes, it is.
You're contacting beyond the borders of South Korea. And so local media here in the country are projecting greater interactions on the cultural front amid the new diplomatic friendship, right?
Right. When it comes to cultural exchange, we can, I think, definitely look forward to a hike. And especially as pundits say that the K-wave, in fact, played a pivotal role in actually forging these diplomatic ties. Also, as Jadis earlier mentioned, the kind of fan club already played a role as a kind of ambassador or embassy. So more official events now can be expected to be organized on the government level. And with more cultural exchange, there will be more interest in the Korean language, leading to more language classes or centers. And already a few days after the forging of diplomatic ties went public, a Cuban arts university said it's planning to open a Korean language class starting next month. So that would be this month now. The trial program at the Instituto Superior de Artes made the decision on the back of growing demand for Korean language education, as well as the establishment of the bilateral diplomatic ties. The tourism sector is also eyeing a boom in travel between the two countries, with domestic tourism businesses actively starting to develop travel packages to Cuba. Now, one tourism agency here said it'll plan a product in the first half of the year and bring it out as early as in August. So I will also keep my eye on that.
Well, that's the summer then. We have some time left, which is why, Jadis, I'm going to ask you, if you were advising a group of travelers here in South Korea, perhaps your friends, South Korean friends, who are planning a trip to Cuba, what are some places that you would recommend for them to visit, as well as, of course, a few dishes to try that would give you the exclusive Cuban taste?
I do believe that first stop would have to be Havana, and Old Havana, which is one of the most representative places that we have. Everybody get to see this kind of romantic view with the old cars and the buildings that has such an eclectic architecture. And then you will have to go also to Matanzas, Cardenas perhaps, or maybe Varadero to see the beaches, the beautiful white sand beaches we have in Cuba.
Pristine beaches.
Yes. And you can do a stop to the eastern part of the country, maybe Santiago de Cuba, which is a city that's very famous for the festivals, the music and dance festivals. So,
and these festivals take place all throughout the year? Or are
there are several. So maybe you can check, but usually in summer we have the most of them, especially in Santiago de Cuba.
What about the food?
The food, I would say that in Havana and each place you can try it, but the ones made, the homemade ones are the best. And maybe try ajiaco. Which is,
ajiaco?
Yes, which is a Cuban soup that's very famous and is very nice to have.
Do you have spicy food in Cuba as well?
We don't.
How did you respond to the spicy food here in South Korea?
At first it was shocking because I was not used to it at all, and I used to cry every time I had. It was very, very interesting, but I got used to it over time.
It's an acquired taste. I'm sure you'll agree, right, Soa? Right then.
I'll be also very interested in what kind of Korean foods you would recommend to your Cuban friends.
Maybe something that is very different would be for us like tteokbokki, or the kimbap also is kind of different. And I would also say bibimbap.
Do you see bibimbap as being popular then among your friends?
Yes, because you can also like graduate the level of spicy.
That's
by yourself.
Right.
But yeah, I do think those would be like the main ones I would like them to try, because since it's so different to our cuisine, it would be something interesting.
Of course. What are your plans, Jadis, for this year here in Korea now?
Well, right now I'm staying here in South Korea as an artist, with an artist visa, working as a singer-songwriter. And I'm planning to do some music and keep promoting, and those are my plans for the year. Like, keep working on my side of what I can do actually as a Cuban citizen abroad, as an artist, do some sort of cultural diplomacy on my own as well, and just contribute a little bit every time I can.
Good to know. Best of luck, Jadis, and thank you so much for making time to be with us here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was an incredible experience.
Right, so thank you very much for your insights today.
Anytime.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again same time tomorrow.